Hello and good morning, everyone. Only Positivity here. I have my coffee with me, ready to explore this new phase of life with you all. So over the past few years, I have gained a whole new perspective on life, and I've realized that life is too short to not be enjoying yourself while doing great things. So come along with me as I explore this new lens through fitness, photography, reading, traveling, cannabis, and much more. Looking forward to the journey, guys. And remember, only positivity. All right, man. We are live, dude. Thank you for doing this with me, man.
No, of course. Happy to be here. And, I'm a big Only Positivity fan. Listened to all 77, I think, most recently. So, really like all the different kinds and the different styles. And, it's pretty inspiring what you do. So it's nice to be here. And I also concede, if I was ever invited, I was hoping you'd invite me. If I was ever invited, what would I want to talk about? And I think you chose a really good topic. So I'm looking forward to it.
Love it, man. Love it. No, I think one of the main things I've been doing is trying to stay consistent with the book reviews, because I think that's it's good to have some independence from your guests, and it keeps me accountable. It keeps me able to say new things when I'm chatting with people like yourself, and so I like to stick on the reading things. And what was nice was, you recommended this book, and I was like, even if I don't like it, it's going to be something that we can chat about. So that's really good. And then I've been making my way around to my friends, which has brought me closer to them in a lot of ways because I do deep dives on their careers and I want to know more about it. I got friends who are clinicians. I got friends who are in special education, and everyone is passionate about what they do, which seems to be a common theme. So I just try to reach out and chat with them,
Yeah, it's kind of cool because, reading is one of those things. I think you've mentioned this on your podcast before where we don't really, when we're young and when we're in college and stuff, we don't really read for fun after a while. And then now we're kind of reading, but the cool part about reading is that you resonate with it based on who you are and what you value, and meeting people and talking with people, you get to see who they are, and share in a way that's concrete but also is very open to interpretation. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, no, 100%. I couldn't agree more, man. And reading has done a lot for me. It's helped me just have perspective. And I picked up a lot of that through the pandemic because, we couldn't travel anywhere. And I've mentioned this on earlier podcasts, but reading is kind of like traveling in your mind, you're getting out of your comfort zone. You're kind of meeting new ideas in the same way you would meet new people and things like that. And you force yourself to be open to those ideas, whether you agree with them or not. You ingest them, you talk about them and things like that. So that was one thing I definitely didn't understand growing up. Literature was always associated with grades and pass fail and things like that. So in this new age or this new awakening, I'm really finding a new relationship with education, and it's very euphoric.
Yeah, no, it totally is. And I think it's interesting because I think as we were younger and you're making friendships, you're hey, I'm gonna have a sleepover, and that's gonna be it. That's the content of our friendship. Or you go out and you have dinner, and that's the content of our friendship. But I feel as we get older, and I feel you and I talked about this a lot, where we crave this intimacy through concrete things that we can build on, grow with, change with. And I feel reading is a really good segue into that. You're hey, what do you care about, man? What matters to you? And I feel you get ideas and words and thoughts from stuff like this. And I think that's something to build on, which I think is cool.
Definitely. And there's a lot of introspection that you have to do as an individual when you read, like we were talking about. And, going off your point where, a lot of times you connect with people on a surface level thing, and that's great, right? You talk about working out, you talk about some of the current events, TV shows that you're watching. Those are all great things. But I think what brings people a little bit deeper and connected is some of those ideas, the fact that you and I, we enjoy different things. We enjoy a lot of the same things, but we enjoy different things. And I don't only want to be around people that are just like myself, that are only doing what I'm doing, because then I don't learn more. And I find when I don't learn more, or I stay in a box, my ego starts to act up. I'm oh, I got to be better than these people. I got to differentiate myself. I got to make more money or something like that.
Yeah.
And then when I started hearing people's stories and things like that, I realized that, hey, there's no way I could ever compete with you, because we're not the same person. It's not I don't do what you do and you don't do what I do. So competition is futile, and then after you take that off the table, and it just becomes an open channel for love and communication and honesty and things like that, right? So I think it's a really beneficial factor that reading will let you do, is just kind of introspect.
Yeah, and it's cool because, like, it's really cool because I feel like, literature and, and I hate to sound like super cheesy, but like I do think that literature is kind of like this metaphor for life, in that, like a lot of what's good about literature is like character analysis. You're like, hey, what did this person do? And this segues into like what we're going to talk about, like, but it's like, what did this person do, and how did they like be true to themselves? What did they struggle with? How did they come out of that? And then you use reading to have a connection with the person that brings out what did they do and what did they struggle, what matters. And then like for me, like I'm a physician and I work with patients, and I realize that like I grow so much through those interactions because I see what people came from and what they're dealing with and what they do. And I feel like that makes me try to be a better person from that, because I'm like, man, what you're going through like is not what I'm going through right now. And the fact that you, like, when I see a person who's super sick, like in the ICU for example, and is just like so kind to me on their worst day, I'm like, man, like you're way better than me right now. And that pushes you to move forward. And I feel like in that way, like reading, getting to know people, and then what you're doing, like, is just a metaphor for life and like getting better.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that you bring that up, because like, you as a, in your field as a clinician, you probably get people who, like you have a protocol for diagnosing and things like that, as do all clinicians, where it's like they elicit this behavior, these symptoms, and, you check certain boxes and this is the diagnosis, right? And in a way you could streamline and, treat everyone as the same type of individual. But I feel like as like that X factor or that differentiator that you might bring is that, hey, look, yes, you might have the same symptoms as another patient, but your story is different, right? Yeah. Your combination of factors is different. And for me to throw one approach onto you is kind of doing you a disservice, right? I need to figure out how do I get you as an individual to a better place. And that plan, even though this person might have the same symptoms, is going to be a different plan, because that's the professional excellence that I give, by meeting new people and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And like, I resonate with a lot of what you say, on your previous podcast and things like that, of like being a lifelong learner and being open and because I think that's a component of health to me, in that, I think that health is not just what disease process you have, but the way you perceive things. Do you feel secure? Do you feel safe? And so like my approach to my patients always is like, hey man, or, hey, if I want communication, like I want to do for you, because your story, like you say, is just so different. And I find that like, even if they're not getting better, maybe from a physical standpoint or from an x-ray standpoint, they may be getting better despite the fact that I don't see objective evidence yet, because they feel this sense of security in the plan. They feel this sense of security, like, oh, if something goes wrong, I can communicate with my physician about it, and that helps overall health. And maybe the physical part will get there at some point, maybe slower, but like that mind that's changing in the process is just super important in it too.
Yeah, and that's another good segue, like an intangible, right? So like again, health is, everything nowadays is getting it down to a science, like a process, right? But health itself has a lot of intangibles that you can't really like triage, like the mental part of it, right? Like you see folks who have been diagnosed with cancer, and they might have, let's say they get caught at the same stage, right? They get it caught early on, and I'll go out on a limb and say the person with the bad mental state, who's not strong, they might not beat it.
Totally true. I totally agree.
Right? And
yeah,
the person
absolutely.
With the mental strength might beat that, right?
Yeah.
They have a better chance of beating it. But like, how do you measure that? Like, you don't quantify it. And I think human interaction is so, and the book talks about that a lot too, is like human interaction is so interesting. It deserves a study. It deserves a deep dive, because there's no consistency to it. There's it's very, very much volatile.
Yeah. It's hard to like, I do a lot of like simulation based teaching, where like I like, do case bases, and I like, teach trainees for that kind of thing. And, there's one principle that's there that's like deliberate feedback, repetitive practice, and setting a standard. And you do that deliberate practice to meet a standard, but it's interesting because like human interaction sometimes lacks a standard. Right. It's like, what's the standard for behavior? What's the standard for like morality? What's the standard? I don't know. I mean, I don't think there is one, truly. Like, I think it's different for every person. I think we all resonate. We all see good in different things. And I think that's what like this book shows us. Like, everybody perceives good in a different way and sets themselves to a different standard. And I think that's why human interaction is so dynamic and different because, I think the standard of good is different. But I feel like, and I'm sure we'll get this, but like, I just feel like human nature has this intrinsic like gravity towards like what they perceive of good and bad. And there's this natural inclination to want to be better. I think there's this like natural state of human, and how you manifest that is different. And there's I don't think that there's like, just because this person did it this way, this person does it this way. I think you can achieve goodness, betterment, improvement, growth in so many different ways.
Yes. And in a society where we're like so metric oriented, right? Everyone like nowadays, right? We all got the Apple Watches. We just try to track ourselves in so many ways. Like this whole like Spotify Wrapped thing. Like I think that's cool, but I'm like also like what the hell is that?
Yeah.
Like, what did that information do for me? And like folks are sharing it all over the place. Like look at my Spotify Wrapped, and I'm like, that's like we don't need to metric ourselves, because then we put ourselves in boxes, right? But like what makes us different than each other? You know what I mean? Like so
we should celebrate it. I mean,
right?
Yeah.
Right. We should all celebrate our differences, and like we should never be like, hey, I know what's right, right? Because how do you know what's right?
Yeah.
The book tells you a lot of that too. It's like, you have to weigh like the pros and cons, and you have to objectively, and like, the whole like dharma versus adharma concept, right? Like, and how was was Duryodhan right, or was he wrong? Like, who's to say? He was out there trying to live his life and trying to like, find his purpose, as was Arjun, right? And Krishna comes in the mix, and he says the whole Gita and stuff like that. But the book gave me a whole new perspective on right and wrong, right, and how to follow your north and what's true to you. But do you want to?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna go over Jaya Mahabharata by Devdutt. What is it?
Pattnaik.
Yeah. All right, that's serious. So yeah, it's basically an iteration or a interpretation of the Gita. And before we dive in, one thing I'll really say about this book is that I think the author did a really good job of staying objective, and he mixed in factual with interpretation. Right? He outlines the story of what happened, and then he comments on it later on the themes, right? And I think he does his best to be objective about it, and things like that. So I don't know if you felt the same way.
Yeah, no, I absolutely felt the same way. And, really, this was like the first time that I read a Mahabharata that was outside of what we had learned as growing up as kids. And because I feel like what we learned via Mahabharata was like the serial that we watch, that like has its cinematic elements and, is drawing in an audience in that way. And then also like what we learned through a religious organization and word of mouth, and how that was portrayed and what we were hoping to do. What I think is really interesting, just from a context from this author, is that I agree that I think he also like is interesting in that he does this YouTube series that I watch. It's interesting. We can maybe watch it at some point afterwards, but he applies like themes from mythology in Hindu literature and then applies it to business principles.
Wow.
Which is really interesting. But like this book, other ones that he does, he's actually super controversial in India.
Okay.
Like I would say 50% of people who read his stuff don't like him in India, which I think is interesting because I liked this book for the objectivity of it, like you say.
Right.
It was a different perspective, so I gained something from that. And I think there's something to be said about being objective. But I also think that how like literature and mythology and texts like this are used sometimes are not in the most like ideal way, and therefore when it goes against the grain a little bit, it creates a little bit of controversy.
Yes.
And so I thought that was interesting about this, because people don't like to hear different sides of characters that people idolize. People don't like to hear different sides of an interaction of someone that they thought was perfect in every single way.
Yeah.
And for me, this was humbling because, as you learn about human interaction and how to better yourself, you have to realize, I think, it was my take from this, that you don't have to be perfect to do good, and to find good and to want to be good, that everybody is trying to find their own.
Totally.
And that's okay.
Really interesting. No, a lot of good points. And, I want to dive into a few of those, like the, just kind of the pushback, right? On a book like this, right? Yeah. Even as I was reading it, I could feel pushback from like the organization that we grew up in, right? And I was thinking that like, where does that come from, right? I think a lot of it comes from like, a little bit of ignorance, like unwillingness to change and like see other perspectives. And the organization we grew up in, like everyone was the same, right? They were all like Indian immigrants. They came to America with like not much. They set up something and they like clung together. as like that comfort zone, right? And that's what I see.
Yeah.
And one thing that I always thought was interesting was the unwillingness to hear a different side of things, right? Just to have the conversation, right? To say, okay, like the Pandavas were good and the Kauravas were bad. Okay, cool. Like that, I get that's the theme, right? There's the hero and the antagonist. That's a theme of every religious story, right?
Yeah.
Outside of Hinduism. Now, but like if you take it a step further, like was it that simple? Were the Pandavas just good? Like were they just like always good, always made the right decisions? Because that's not relatable. Like I make bad decisions sometimes. I mess up, right? And I never learned that they went through a rebirth, right? And that's kind of the character development stuff you mentioned, right? So the Pandavas weren't always like the best group of people, right?
Yeah.
They were indulgent, right? And they like Beam was indulgent. Like Yudhishthir was very like greedy with his gambling and stuff like that. And so like Arjun had this ego trip going, right? And so when they did the exile, they came back as renewed, but all the while they were kind of like impious, and I don't know if you caught onto those themes or if that's what you felt.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's a lot more gray to the two sides of this than we grew up with.
Yeah.
I think the way that we grew up, what we were learning, and I'll be curious to know what your kind of takeaway was too. But basically, they broke down the Pandavas and broke them into their ideals and said, Yudhishthira represents honesty. He never said he's a leader, and he never said anything that was false, except once, and Narova Kunjarova when he didn't say the elephant thing, and there's that one, or he did something, and then there was Bhim, who was strong and loyal and all these things, and Arjun, who, it was a great student, and we basically like broke all these people down and said they are their ideal,
right.
and that they're perfect in that way, and then we move forward and we idolized those stories, and we said, remember when Arjun was trying to be at looking for a wife, and he focused on that eye and got that arrow in the eye, and that's how he was able to do it of the fish. And you're like, okay, we're basically kind of doing a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Yes.
Like we say that these people are how they are and they're perfect in this way, but then you read a book like this and you realize, like, what I remember one part reading was this like part where Draupadi is in really tears, and she's asking, Bhima is asking her, like, are you sure you're happy with us? Like, are you sure you're good? Like, do you love anybody else? And this is a perspective I'd never heard until I read this book. And then basically Draupadi comes out to say, I actually have feelings for Karna, actually. And the reason and they're like, what? And she's like, the reason I do is because I shouldn't have like said no to him because of caste in getting married to him. I shouldn't have done that. And he would have never like gambled me away. He would have never let anyone call me a bad name in public. Yeah. He would have never disrespected me. And it was a different perspective, but it also shows that this is how they made her feel.
Right.
They made her feel unprotected. They made her feel vulnerable. And, like, we're both married. We know how we feel about our wives. And we would never let anything like that happen. I'm not a Pandava, right. But I just know that I would never let anything like that happen, And so it's like things like that where you're like, yes, they certainly have ideals that I think the stories and interactions are worth dissecting, learning, introspecting about. But they certainly have gray about them, and that's different than how we learned it.
Yeah, and no, it's all good points, right? Like you learn from like the literal teachings that like the character analysis will give you, right? But you also learn about what they didn't do, and you take away things from that, like the vulnerability comment, right? Like they made her feel this way, and a lot, and then a lot of that, like you bring up how she felt that way, and she wished she did like get with Karna, and a lot of these themes of karma come into play, right? Like she was super bogus to Karna, right?
She was.
I don't want you, bro. Like you're a charioteer's son. Like what am I gonna get away from me? And she was super dismissive of him, and the whole court like laughed, right? And like lo and behold, down the road, right? Like she's experiencing some melancholy with her own situation, you know. And you see that theme a lot in like the Mahabharata. And not until I read this book was I like, oh, it's interesting. Like a lot of like even in this, I'm reading this other book right now. I'll tell you about it later, but it's like the boons are a symbol of karma, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times they'll get a boon in the beginning, only for that thing to come back and bite them at the end.
Right.
And I'm forgetting like some specific examples.
Like, I can think of one example.
Yeah.
Like one example is like when when Draupadi was wanting to figure out like who she wanted to get married to, and she asked for this boon for all these qualities, and she was like, I want these 5 qualities. And then what ended up happening then was she got the 5 qualities, but in 5 different people. And so that when they came after what they call Soyamvar, or like where they were like this marriage ceremony, they came home, and then Arjun basically said, hey, I brought these alms, or they call it bhiksha, like I brought these alms for you. And then the mom says, well, split it between all your brothers. And so therefore in that moment, like the reason that happened was because Draupadi asked for this boon that I want these 5 qualities, but now she's a woman that's married to 5 men. And it's like, and that was like controversial, and that was odd, and that created this weird like tension with everybody and how people perceived her. And then that bit her down the fact when she was in the court, and then Karna called her a disrespectful name as a woman of 5 men. And that all started from this. It's interesting just like how that all went down,
it comes full circle, right? It comes that samsara, like, life comes full circle. You're in it until you break that cycle of karma with like, your good deeds and like dharma and all that stuff. It's all really interesting. And like on a more like, like lighthearted note, like I thought like Kunti was kind of wild, bro. I thought she was kind of like your stereotypical like auntie, like that's the persona she took on to me. Like she was like really worried that like the sons would riff amongst each other. Like this like boy mom, right? Like classic boy mom. Like she's worried about her sons only, and like she put in that like little thing where like every like Draupadi would get to be with one husband every single year, and then the other husbands, like in those 4 years that they weren't with Draupadi, they could have their own wives and stuff like that. And I'm like, this seemed like a over-engineered thing. Like, how about we all just get, I get the symbolism behind the 5 qualities, but it's like, why don't everyone just get their own wife? Instead of this drama amongst the brothers and stuff like that. No, but that's just more of it like a lighthearted thing.
I agree with you. I mean it's interesting, like her whole story is interesting, and that like there's all this, like it's so interesting, like the whole thing is interesting. And like, so how we were taught, like with Kunti specifically, was that like she did all this like good taking care of this Rishi or this like saint, and he gave her this boon and was like, I'm going to give you this prayer that when you say it, like you can get like a son or like a kid from that. So then she got like curious and tried it out. And so she was like, oh, I'm going to try this and like pray to the sun and get this. And that's how Karna came. And then she like was like, oh, shit, I can't do this. And then she like put that one down, so that's how Karna's life changed forever because of that. But what I think is interesting about her is like, I think she has this like double side, which I think is like the key of the Mahabharata to me, is that like there's some good and there's some gray, but like some of the good stuff I resonate with so much because it's like kind of inspiring. Like for example, for her, one thing that I think is cool is that, so like her husband Pandu had 2 wives, him and Madhvi, but of the 5 sons that she had, she actually like gave the most love to not her own sons. She gave them to Madhvi's sons, like Sahadev and Nakul. And so like then I think it just like, and it went to show that like she had no, like she didn't care about like blood relations. She didn't care. She gave extra love to someone whose mom wasn't around, just because like she didn't have to do that. She didn't need to do that, but she went out of her way to make sure that like he was taken care of. And so when they go to exile too, like Kunti's like, hey, just guys, make sure you take care of Sahadev, because like he's a little bit like, I worry about him more. And she like was consistent in that for so long. So I think that was like a really good thing about being unconditionally loving to somebody.
Yes. And I think that's like a staple you'll see like even today, and hearing the commentary that he puts through afterwards. He does a lot of the social dynamics, right? Of like that society and things like that. And you see like, Indian mothers, they really love their kids. They love them with all their heart, but sometimes to a fault, right? Sometimes overly, sometimes crippling, right? So I think like these themes, like they make sense, right? Like it helps you just like think about your own situation and be like, okay, this is something that's ingrained in the culture, you know what I mean? And like you can like it or not like it, but it's part of the culture, and you can forge your own path and still kind of maintain some of it and not take some of it, And I think a lot of the deep character analysis does that for me in this book. Like like in our organization that we grew up in, it was really like factual based, right? You memorize like the shlokas, you memorize these passages, you can like spit out like what the qualities of the character, right? Now that's good. I think that's good surface level stuff. We should be able to like have a mutual level of factual knowledge before we converse. But what I think never happened was that next step, that deep dive. And maybe I was too young for that or whatever. Because, I was reading like when the Pandavas or any of like, Dronacharya's students would go to the ashram or go to him to study, right? They would study more than just like scripture, right? They would study things about the mind, about warfare, about the physical aspect of things. And that to me is very like, a holistic, comprehensive knowledge, life knowledge, as opposed to just scriptural that I felt like, we were taught. And, like I think now my whole vibe is comprehensive, right? It's like, a lot of times in this society you specialize and things like that, and that's good. But I think being well-rounded is something I really took from this book.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think you're right. Like that whole like ashram system is interesting in that like, you live and you're developing your dynamics as a person. Like the person who teaches you takes on this fatherly role, but also takes on this like disciplinary, like I'm trying to see your potential and push you to the best role, which I think comes from knowing someone holistically. Like you can't put like, even with friendships, right? Like, like I really always look to you and I'm like, man, you got a really good friend group, and I think it's really cool because I think it's like, it's nice because I feel like what you guys do well is you all see each other in different perspectives and like, hey, I'm going to push you in this way, or like, I'm going to push you in this way, or here's not where I'm going to push because you're doing well here, kind of thing. And I think that's important with like that system specifically. Like I think if you holistically look at someone comprehensively, you know where to push, where not to push. And then also you can reflect and be like, here's where I need to be pushed. Can you help me as well too in that?
No, I know. And I appreciate the kind words, man. It's really nice of you to notice and say, again, it's a full picture thing, and I think when you do that, like that unconditional thing for people you care about and things like that, like you take your stake out of it, right? Like I want you to be the best you should want me to be the best me, and like through me, like us helping each other out, we'll become the best versions of ourselves. And otherwise I just don't have time to connect. I don't really have it. Life's busy,
Absolutely. And like in building off what you were saying, like with growing up in the organization that tells you facts, and I think what's hard about it is because the dynamics that are captured in like a story like this, or the way that we're presented and who is presenting to us, like you lose that applicability, I think, a little bit. Like, how we grew up is different than our generation before us grew up, and the generation before us grew up. And like, I think a really nice point that you made was, well, it lets you understand the dynamics of what you see, like the way that Kunti behaves, you can see in your own mom, you can see in yours, and, and things like that. And you're like, you in mine as well. And I'm like, I think about that and I'm like, it's interesting how dynamics exist and you see and you're learning those dynamics probably without even knowing it. And then those get passed on somehow in a way and because we don't question it. We don't ask. Like the age-old mother-in-law, daughter-in-law dynamic is old, generations old, but we can see it to this day. Yeah. And I think because people learn that behavior unconsciously, but they don't question it. They're like, oh yeah, this is how it should be. Oh, this is, or they even like reflectively say on a surface level, oh, I would never do that.
Right.
Yeah, I would never do that. Or I'm never going to be that kind of person. But it happens. And I think the reason is because like no one is willing to do review objectively and be like, this probably wasn't great, or this probably wasn't good, but it's like, oh, this is what's always been done, so let's keep doing that.
And like the funniest part is like when you ask somebody like that, right? When you ask somebody, like you should always be able to talk about like your morals and values, right? Otherwise, like they're not your morals and values, right?
Yeah.
So if I ask you like why you do something, right, and we get to the bottom of it, and the answer is I just do it because that's it, that's just what I'll be like, that's good, if you can rationalize that. But I think there just needs to be like an underlying like schema to everything, like that. Right. You need to be able to articulate it to me, and if you can't, I don't understand, I just don't get it. Like even as we go back to like the character analysis here, it's like like Arjun was the third brother, right? So he was in the middle, and what the author in this book emphasizes that he represents balance. So his older brothers were a certain way, right? In like, strength and things like that. And his other brothers were in a different way, more passive, right? Nakul and Sahadev, they were more passive. And then Yudhishthira and Bhima were more aggressive. Mm-hmm. And Arjun is right in the middle. And I think that's such a good thing because, when you talk about some of like the standard hymns, right? Like Om Mani Padme Hum and all this stuff, even the Om itself, right? That whole symbol is about balance, right? Dream state, conscious state, and things like that. And then you say, oh, all these things tie together, right? And you see, like, in my life with fitness and traveling and podcasting and reading, these all have a same underlying theme of what they do for me. And then when you started thinking about that, you realize that this Hinduism thing they put it together with tact, right? They took centuries and millennia to do this, and then you appreciate it more, right? But then when we silo learning on one thing and then we silo learning on this thing, it's hard. No one connects that for you,
Right. And I think it's like, it's all about context and again, applicability, because like, if we say like, cause what we were sometimes taught is like, you have to be like Arjun, we learn songs that were like, I'm going to be Arjun. I'm going to be Arjun. I'm going to be Arjun. And what that does is I feel like it sets you up for disappointment, because you're like, well, I can't do all of this. I personally remember reflecting when I was like learning and trying to realize like how Hinduism plays into my life. Like, I don't think I can be this person, or I don't think I can do this stuff. I can try to emulate to the best of my ability what balance is, or what focus is, or what being a humble student is, because I think that's another thing Arjun did really well and had this relationship with Dronacharya, is because he was a humble student. He would always ask questions. He would practice into the night, all focus on things like no one else would. And so I think in that way, I think it's something that you have to like holistically apply to your life, because if you silo, like you say, then you're set up for disappointment.
Yeah, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're not learning like the big picture, and I think that's like going off the whole thing with Arjun and Dronacharya, which was really interesting for me, which is I resonate with it because like I'm trying to lean in and get to know people more and things like that, and through that I'm finding a lot of new skills, like for example, like the 5 Pandavas, let's say they signed up for the Dronacharya experience, right? Like they paid it, but Arjun was the only one who got his like reserved set of teachings, right? Because he was only gonna Dronacharya was only gonna leave that for like Ashwatthama, right? He was only gonna leave that for him. But through like Arjun's like balance, through his want to learn more, not accepting just the surface level, he got all the skills. And I think that's like a really good lesson. The author didn't go through this, but I was like leaning into things that like are good for you, right? Like not half-assing it. Don't just accept like what it's given to you. Like you can always have more. You can always push for more if you ask for it.
No, absolutely. And I think there's just so much power in like some of these character analyses. I think that really like can push you forward to think about things. I think a lot about, my wife and I always talk about Draupadi, and, I know Draupadi had a lot of things that were maybe a little off color in terms of maybe how she had some comments to Duryodhana, or she had some comments to Karna, and that's true. But you think about Draupadi, and I think what I love about her is that she was just so unapologetically herself. Like she wanted the best for herself. She demanded respect from those around her. She wanted to direct things. She had opinions. She was not unwilling to share those. And then on top of that, when things bothered her, she was gonna let people know. And I know that we kind of hyperbolize them in these books. So like when Dushasan was mean, she was like, you know what, I am not going to wash my hair until his blood is in my hair, and then I wash it. Yet, you know what, yes, that's hyperbolizing, but you know what, she wasn't going to let anyone get away with disrespect. She wanted respect for a lot of people, and it was in the thing is in this book and in the thing, she wasn't personally, the thing that I think was powerful is like she wasn't personally disrespected. She wasn't like, oh, I'm mad because of what you did to me. She said, I'm mad because of the example that you set for this world.
Yeah, this
is unjust for women.
Yes.
And this is why I'm mad about it. And I think that's powerful. Yeah. I'm like, you did this to me and that was horrible, but like, I will never let you do this to another woman. And and she stood that ground. And I think that's important.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Like, and she was the tough one, like she was always getting downtrodden on. People were like subjecting her to like negativity and things like that. But she owned it, and she went ahead, and she was like she's like a Sita like character, right? Like they're damsels in ways, but like they're stronger than the men in a lot of ways too.
Agreed.
So I think the character analysis, it's in this book, it's like I said, it's objective. It shows her pros and her cons, and she did have that that whole she had petty ways sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? But she was always able to like see through it and do what's best for not only the world, but like her loved ones as well. Which is a good one. And like, not to backtrack too hard, but I don't exactly remember the specifics of that Yayati story that's in there. It's like one of the first stories, because that's like what kicks off like the Mahabharata, right? But like the one of the themes that came out of that was like the father like sacrificing the son for his benefit, right? And that's another staple of like Indian culture, right? Is like the kids are meant to serve the parents and not the other way around, right? Like, you're born to like make your parents proud and things like that, and if you don't, you become like some kind of bad son. In that story, Yayati comes back with he gets cursed somehow. It comes back to him. I forget exactly what happens, but I think that's another like very interesting notation that this guy put through that I could see being ill received like all over India.
Right?
That's a common theme.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this like this hierarchy that is always like put through, and then you look back and you're like, you know what, like this is a concept that needs to be challenged. I'm all about like taking care of our parents and doing our best by them, but I think that there is something to be said about growing with your parents as well too, and supporting each other in a mutual way that brings us both up, because again, tying back to the theme of your whole podcast, that we should be lifelong learners, that you can grow at any age and you can learn at any age. And that, if there's this service mentality, then there's this intrinsic, I know better than you know, and I expect and you do.
Yeah.
And that's not a growing mentality. That's a set in way mentality. And I think that's why, like, it's funny because like we were talking, like, not to get on a sidetrack, but like, you have there's these like things on WhatsApp that people get all the time. And like they send all these like guilt-ridden like videos. And like one of these videos that I received recently was about like, man, do you think that your like 80-year-old parents are gonna change? No. We should change for them.
Right.
And it's like, wait, let's slow down with that, because like what are we accomplishing by that type of guilt-ridden mentality? We're not accomplishing anything. Everybody's upset with that when we're absorbing things that we resent, we're not talking about that in open communication, and we're not trying to be better. And the minute that someone tells me that someone can't change, then I'm going to question that, because you can change anytime you want to. It's a mental thing.
Yeah.
And as long as you're mentally strong, you can change.
100%. And it's just so funny how easily people can be swayed, right? So like I saw that video, and I know like a bunch of people were like, let me forward this on to other individuals. This is right. This is the truth. And I couldn't even believe that the guy in that video sat down and recorded that with as much confidence that he had.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so backwards. Like, you're fundamentally like distraught, bro. Like, you need to figure this one out, because you're propagating that people should like stop learning.
Right.
Like, you're propagating that. And yes, like we'll see it with a lot of individuals, right? Older people, family, friends, uncles, aunts, whatever, what have you, right? Who are a little older, and you're right, they won't change, right? But it's not that they can't change. They just won't.
Yeah, right.
Because it's tough, right? It's tough to be vulnerable. It's tough to kind of look stupid. It's tough to sit and do a deep dive on how, like, if we had a rough interaction, what was my part in that? Can I take some fault there? I don't really see that with any like elder generation, right?
Right.
It's like there's no circle back on like what I did wrong, how I can make it better next time. It's just like, what I'm gonna do, and not to knock this, I'm gonna go pray to God, and God's gonna take care of it for me.
Right.
And it's like, that's good. You need to have faith in something, right? But how can you leave all the control up to like a higher power, right? You're surrendering your control to that higher power, when in reality, you have it. You have the ability to change. We see people who are into their 90s, still up and around, still learning, still reading and stuff like that. And for you to just say, like, let's say at 60 and just cut it all off, it's like, bro, like, your life pretty much could have just started at this point.
Right. Absolutely. And then like on top of that, like I think that what the missing part always is like, like, sure, you can go pray to God and hope that things get better. But like, I think the underlying theme is like, he's not going to, like, God, he or she is not going to help someone who doesn't help themselves first. I mean, we got free will for a reason to do things to improve ourselves. And like this whole idea of give and receive is not in my opinion, what like that is about. Like, I think you focus on yourself and try to be the best version of yourself, and then that's where you start. I mean, if you're in an area of giving and taking, then that's not really a mentality of growth, at all. And
and no, totally spot on. And it's like, I have faith in our relationship. Like, I think I have faith that it's good for me, that it's gonna, even grow over time.
Yeah.
But like, what if I wasn't working at it? What if we weren't like chatting and like, challenging each other, doing things like this, or, visiting each other, trying to stay positive? That's all on me. That's all within my control. That's not like just me saying, hey, we're close. We're gonna like just be fine, and we will be fine. That's fine. But like, we could make it really great if we just like, put a little bit more effort into it.
Exactly.
And we're worth that, right? Like, the people you love are worth that type of interaction, that type of hard work,
I think it's absolutely true. And so in like your reading of this book, do you have like a particular character that you like the best, or that you resonate with the most?
I don't know if there's like a particular character that I resonate with the most. I think like, you gravitate towards like Arjun, because he's like experiencing it like the fullest, because he's like, having that moment with Krishna, like on the battlefield and things like that. And that's a good segue, because he's having it like a very like dramatic issue, right? But like, it's an issue that we all have, right? It's like, once you, so they use Duryodhana as like the example of like the animalistic, right? He's like after his impulses, and that's the baseline, right? And I kind of consider that the poverty line. So like, he's right there. Now, once you get above the poverty line, that's when your mind opens up, right? That's what you can think about, like, lifelong things and principles. And that's, I feel like, where Arjun's at. Like, he's like, all right, I'm above this. Like, I'm above like just survival now. Now, how do I make the most out of my life? Like, what's right to do, right? And that's like, in a nutshell, what I'm taking from it. And, I think what Krishna is trying to outline is like, there's some things that are like innately right? Like, you don't want to hurt people. You don't want to like live an impious life, giving into your impulses, right? Sensual pleasure. The goal is self-mastery. Can you master your emotions? Can you master your impulses? And even when you think you have, you haven't, right? Like, you move forward with it. It's a constant, and it's a cycle, right? It's a cycle. Like, you're gonna have your good moments, you're gonna have your bad moments, but you should be trending positive overall. So that's like, character-wise, Arjun probably the most.
Yeah.
What about yourself, man?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good one. And I think what I really like about like his relationship that you talk about is I really like the friendship between Arjuna and Krishna, which I think is really nice. And I wonder if that's maybe a reason that you gravitate towards him a lot, because I feel like you value friendship and putting work into friendship a lot.
Yeah.
Because like, that's all the like, building off what you said, like the reason Krishna and Arjun are close is like not by accident, like they're related actually, like by relationship, but at the same time, like they live so far away from each other, but like they put a lot of work into their relationship. Like they talked a lot, they talked about intimate thoughts about what they went through and how to build their relationship. And I feel like that is like a friendship that is like amazing to see, because they pushed each other to the best, because like Krishna also had his and it's interesting because like he was like is thought of God, but he also did very mischievous things and did things were a little off color as well too, for the better good. But like Arjun would call him out on that stuff and be like, hey, this is this and this is this. And so it's like this mutual friendship that is really powerful. For me, I think the one that I resonate with is Vidur, and Vidur was like this minister of like of that area that they lived in called Hastinapur, and he's actually like the third brother of like Pandu, Dhritarashtra, and he's the third one, and he was the minister. And what I really like about him is I think he was like followed a code of conduct to a very like disciplined degree. Like he and wasn't afraid to give harsh feedback. That's something I'm working on as a like personally. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I think in this world we do a lot of networking, and we do a lot of like trying to accommodate to the other person, which I think is important. I think social dynamics are super important, but I also think that especially when you're in a place where like you're trying to learn and you're trying to grow, I think like giving the right feedback that can help improve is really important. And there's a tactful way, not just giving, but also receiving feedback as well too. Like I'm working on the way that I receive feedback also, because I want to be better, I want to do better, and I want to make sure that my mind is always open to that. But what I like about him is that he always gives like very constructive feedback for the better. And I always joke, but like I akin my wife to Vidur a lot, because I think my wife also like sometimes like is very good at giving like constructive feedback, and in the moment you can be like, wait, what did you say? And then you're like, oh, like you are a very forward thinker. Like the way that you're picking up on this, you're seeing better for me. And and I appreciate this about you.
Yeah.
And it's probably not easy knowing me and how like over the top I can be or something like that. It's probably not easy for you to come to the table and be like, hey, this is what I feel we should be doing differently, or this is what I should be doing. But I'm like, yo, this is why, like, and I always call her like my North Pole compass. Like, you're the compass of my life, because like you give me feedback and I have security in that I'm never gonna stray, because like I know the first person to tell me that I need to get back on track is like someone like you or my wife. Like, they're gonna just get me on track, you know?
Yeah.
And so I resonate with Vidura, and maybe not because of me, but because like who I see in my life be that for me.
Yeah, no, so that's great. I need to do a circle back on Vidura, but no, I hear all of that stuff, man. Like being able to, like, that whole objective thing, being able to do that and being open is great, and being able to like pull yourself aside from it, right? Like, you know, receiving feedback is not easy, right, all the time, and giving feedback can be easy, but it also can be hard, right? Like when a lot of times when you're in a situation, you right away want to give some feedback and course correct and things like that, but you realize a lot of time in a relationship or things like that, it's not about that all the time, right? Sometimes it's about, hey, follow through with this, because what I saw you do was do some effort, right? So I'm not going to say, hey, oh, you should maybe do it that way, because that's not validating you, right? That's not reinforcing your effort. Yeah. So if you're going to do something and you're going to put an effort around it, you're going to do your due diligence, even though I might think you might fail, I'm going to commend you for that, right? But like, do you say something in that moment, or do you not say something in that moment, right? And that's how you have to get aside yourself and like really have that dialogue. And I can't even tell you what's right or wrong in that situation. It's very situational, you know. So that's a very interesting character, man. I gotta do a little bit more of an analysis on that one.
Yeah, and like building off that, it's interesting because like I like what you said about that feedback thing, because like, you know, for bringing it back to like something I do on an everyday basis, like, so after we do these, like what I was talking about, simulation activities, what we often do is like we'll do this debrief session, and the debrief is like a really structured debrief where how it's posed is what you do is you operate from a mode of inquiry always. And so what they say is like, and like there's a lot of literature behind this on like how the mind thinks and how it receives feedback, and I read a lot about this, how to be an effective leader, or how to do those kind of things. But like how it says is like you first identify something that is like a matter of fact. Hey, I saw you do this. Yeah. And then you reflect it back in like kind of what your thought is, so that they're not questioning what your thought is. You know, for me, I think that a lot of times for me, this can be really overwhelming. So I totally get why something like this could happen. But I'm curious for you, like, what were you thinking in that moment? And it's like very like, and it sounds very scripted, but in a way it's interesting, because what you're ultimately trying to do is understand the frame. Like, where are they coming from? Or like, because it's not just black and white, like, oh, you perform badly and therefore you need to be better. It's not that at all. It's more like, hey, I'm curious, like, how did this happen, and like what can we do together, and like to, maybe it's a frame thing, maybe it's a, you know, oftentimes it's like, oh, I didn't feel safe in this situation and so that's why I reacted, or previously, like, I experienced this really bad situation, and so I always think of that when I do this. And it's like, oh, okay, this is why this is happening, and let's just find a way to strategize so that doesn't happen. And for me, like, that's the most life-giving part of my job, because like I'm able to like understand people, I'm able to understand myself, and then like communicate with people better through a mode of inquiry. Yeah, and curiosity, really.
No, definitely, 100% agree. Like we said, everyone's different, and they're gonna come at things differently, you know. And you know, let's say I, you know, take this, you know, my life to a new height, right? But that's just for me, you know. Like, you might have taken your life to a different height, you know, and that's your own, you know. And if I don't understand that, then I can't relate to you, and I can't like even help you, you know. Sometimes help is not about feedback, right? It's about lending an ear.
Absolutely, you know? Just listening. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It's about hearing yourself say something, and you know, I play a lot of roles like that in with my friends, where I don't really give them advice. They just are like, hey, I need you to be there, right? I need you to just listen. And so that's something I can do as well, you know. And that's something like our significant others do sometimes too, or they nudge us in the right direction. Right. So those type of things are really, really important, I think, in all relationships. And I think, you know, on a slight tangent, going back to like what we were talking about before, is like the balance between like spirituality and sensuality. Yeah. You know, in like what you read in like religious transgressions or trajectories is that, you know, oftentimes they'll say, okay, you have to go be an ascetic, right? You know, to be like this enlightened individual, go into the forest, do your thup, and like, you know, that's how you're going to achieve your enlightenment. Others, you know, will say you can indulge, you know, But like, I think one thing that's good about like Hinduism and Buddhism is like they get you to get that balance, right? Like, you know, we like to indulge, right? Like we're sitting here in like a nice house, like, you know, like we like to go travel and things like that. But like, why do we do these things? You know, like it's for the learning part of it, right? Like, you know, we go travel together because it brings us closer as bros, you know, as a family. And but we don't overindulge, right? We're not like, if you didn't have a nice house, like that, there wouldn't be a difference here, right? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
It's not the material stuff that matters 100%, but it's okay to like indulge in it if you can control your senses. And that's one thing I really took from this book that was really interesting for me.
Yeah, and I think like the way that we approach these situations, I think, has like evolved over time as well too, which is so nice. Like, for example, like I feel like the quality of our interactions, we're always focusing on that, right? Like every time we're together, like, yeah, we go out and we have a 10-course meal and we enjoy ourselves, but like the whole time we're asking questions about what makes us tick, what do we want to do better, what are our goals, how do we get closer. We vent about things that bother us, like we're open about all this stuff. And so like, yes, we indulge, and yes, we are very insightful about the things that we indulge in, but I also feel like, I think what I like about like our interactions with us and our significant other is that like we're focused on the quality of it. Like what are we going to do to get closer, and like how are we going to make each other better? Like, for example, like, you know, even like little things, like even when you started this podcast, it's like, it's cool because like yesterday I was listening to the one with Coach of Beetle Beats, and shout out to them. But it was like it was a really good podcast because like it made me think, man, like you can take a hobby that starts as a conceptual hobby, but it can be a way of life, you know? And it made me think, like when we were talking in our walk yesterday, I was like, you know, maybe I want to pick up the dole again and kind of do that. And it's not insignificant. It didn't just come like out of blue. I listened to the podcast, I thought about it, I listened to the passion, I was like, yeah, I could do this, you know? And so it's like even listening and like you say, and like focusing on the quality of the interaction really can be a really positive thing.
Yeah, no, that means a lot, man. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. And again, one of the main things is like, you know, it's fun to connect with people who aren't taking themselves too seriously. You know, it's like we're all like relatively successful individuals. You know, we do our thing, but like you know, the ego is not involved. And so like when I see someone who just like kind of really likes what they do and really is an expert in it, and they're going to do that deep dive, they're going to bring that like level of intelligence or passion to a conversation. I would like really like to connect with those types of individuals. They can be, you know, someone who does drumming, they can be someone who's a corporate employee, you know. So I think like those types of things I really learned from, you know, a lot of teachings from this book, you know, but just in general through reading, you know, like you see commonalities. I'm reading this other book. It's called A Hero with 1,000 Faces, right? And they say like, you know, Jesus Christ was crucified, right? And then he was resurrected and he was reborn, you know, like similar to the way the Pandavas were reborn after they went to exile, right? And if you do a little bit more of a deep dive in it, right? So he was crucified, his 2 arms were on the cross, his 2 feet, and his head, right? So it's five senses. It represents like the mastery of his senses, and he came out like a new individual, right?
Interesting.
So like as I do those deep dives on things like that, I realize that a lot of these religions, right, they stem from a similar way, and like the structure they put around it is different, right? And there's a lot of little nuanced like details that don't make any sense to me. So like even in this one, like, you know, you said Krishna was definitely on the bullshit at times, right? So like he, you know, there was like, I forget when they were doing this whole battle at Kurukshetra, right? There was a thing where like, I forget who it was, couldn't get killed. Was it Drona during the sun?
So basically like, so there are 2 things like, that were happening. Like one, I don't know if you're thinking about the Bhishma thing, who couldn't get killed and he needed to be killed in front of a woman. Is that what you're thinking about?
So that's one. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there was that, and then there was like, you know, they tried to distract Jarasandh as well too, and like take him like really far, so that they could like be distracted. And then there was that's where Abhimanyu happened too. But I don't know if that's what you're thinking of too, but.
So I forget, there was someone. So the Bhishma thing with the whole like the transgender person, right? That they sent out. So that's an interesting one for me. But there was one where I forget, somebody could not be killed like in the sun.
Yeah.
I forget who it was.
I think that was Jarasandh. I think, yeah.
Right? And then so Krishna. Hey, it's cloudy.
Yeah, that's like, right. That's right. What? Yeah, exactly.
You know, like you can just do that.
Right.
Like that to me is like I get it. Like, and that's another controversial thing that it's like, okay, can you swindle in the name of like justice and good.
Right. Do the ends justify the means? That's a really good question. And that's like in European history we talked about Machiavelli, and that's the whole thing. Like, do the ends justify the means? And I personally struggle with that, because like I don't know that that's true. Like, I don't know that you can do whatever you want to justify the mean. I can understand intentions, and I can understand like for the greater good. I can understand that. I can understand that philosophy. But I struggle with like, can you do whatever to like make good happen? And like for example, like another example is like, so at that Swayamvar, we were talking about Karna earlier, and we were talking about how like Draupadi said no because he's a charioteer's son, but who, like, Krishna is the one who told her to do that.
Yeah,
he was like, don't you do that, right? And kind of thing. And he was obviously thinking of the greater good, and things happen for the right reason. But you also wonder, like, this is not great. And then also like there's another example of like Krishna, and he has like a relative whose name is Shishupal, and who is like not doing very well, and basically like he basically was like, you can insult me this many times and I'm gonna let you have it, and if you go one more over, I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah.
And in a way, like this guy was out of control. He needed to go. But like in a way, it was like bait as well too. He was baiting him. Like, hey, you have 108, what number it was, like insults that you can do to me, but you do the 109th and you're done.
Yep.
Yep. And that wasn't exactly kosher either. Like, he was baiting him. He knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew that he would take the bait. Yeah. So it's like that kind of thing. You're like, yeah, it's probably for the greater good. But I think that if you operate on a code of conduct that is in the best way that you can be, I think that's the best that you can do. We can justify a lot of things, but I feel like for me, consistency and code of conduct is the most important thing.
Right. And so like, again, like, it's just like little things like that where you're like, it makes you think. And maybe it's put there for that reason, right?
Yeah, right.
Maybe hopefully you have enough familiarity with the scripture where you can make that type of assumption, or you can make that type of conversation. Maybe that's what it's there for.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good ends justify the means conversation. The funniest one, I think, to me is like, so Gandhari was the one who was blind, right?
Yes.
Dhritarashtra's wife, right? And so like Duryodhana, she tells Duryodhana, come over naked, right?
Right.
And like, let me see it. And then Krishna's all, you're naked. Like, and then he like puts some clothes on. Right?
Yes.
And lo and behold, he gets killed that way.
Correct.
Like, what kind of shit is that?
Yeah. No.
Right?
That's for sure. Like, yeah. And like the context of the story is like, she was going to give him, like, because she had never taken her like thing out, like her little tape off of her arm, and she had this like magical power that she was going to make him like indestructible. But then Krishna like baited him, and I was like, hey, you better cover yourself in front of your mom. And then like he got killed in the thighs, and that's what killed him. But like another example is like that same time, like Krishna told Draupadi to go to see Bhishma, and she was in the other camp. Like, she wasn't supposed to go there, but she goes, and like she kind of like navigates her way there, and then Bhishma gives her this blessing that's called Akhanda Saubhagyavati, which means like that I wish you a happy married life. And then he does that, and it's like, well, his whole goal is to kill all her husbands. Well, now I just did this, and now I can't really do that. So that wasn't an accident that he coached Draupadi to go at that time, because he thought somebody else was coming, but like he told her to go at this time. So like there's a lot of like a little bit of that mischievousness, but then you look at the other side and you're like, you know what? Morality is one of those things where it's not black and white either. There's this mischievous nature to it where like what's good. And if you know what's good, like maybe not the ends justify the means, but you can be creative about how you're going to help somebody. Like, I think about like relationships that people have, and that things are different in how you communicate with them and how you work with them. And maybe the way that you want to improve your relationship isn't conventional, perhaps. Right. Maybe it's not conventional, but maybe you try something else because you know how this person is. So I'm going to do my best in this way. And maybe it's not what everybody else thinks is appropriate, but it's right for the situation, you know? And there's some validity to that, I think, too.
And it's good. Like, and I think like the path that we're heading down with that conversation is that like your mixture of variables, it's your own, but like you don't have to make sure, but like it should be the right mixture, right? But it doesn't have to be the same. It's a bunch of different mixtures, and like even one thing you'll take from that is that, so when I was doing like youth group stuff back in the organization, like what are some of the main things you think about like for an Indian youth that we never learn is like, like anything with sex, right? Like how do you
can't talk about it.
Can't talk about it. Anything with like maybe alcohol or marijuana, any of those things, don't talk about it, right? So it's a blasphemy. And any of those, like, how do you navigate with other individuals, right? Like as an adult now, how do you set expectations? We're so obedient as kids, but you don't want to be obedient to like some other person. You want to be strong, you want to be like you want to, push back on them if they're trying to oppress you. You know what I mean? And not to say it was all bad or anything like that, but to relate it back to the book, like, Krishna himself was all with the gopis. You know what I mean? Like, he was doing his thing. And, if one got too close, he was like, I'm out of here, and he definitely like did his thing. You know what I mean? So he was, mock controlled, all this stuff. So he was like, he was like a youthful guy. He was a young man. And for people like us, it's like, you can be that, you can do that. And you can, dip your toe in that dating pool and, but you have to do it in an ethical way. Like there's ways that, when I was single and I was like dating and stuff like that, I didn't see other people doing, right? That were in the same way. So there's a level of respect and a level of morality that you can bring to a situation. And no matter what situation it is, whether I'm at the office, whether I'm talking to you, whether I'm talking to somebody I don't even know who's being disrespectful to me, there's like a same level of respect, right? And again, aside from faith, you bring that back to yourself, right? That's something you control, right? Like if you're getting out of line with me, I can leave, right? I can ensure that doesn't go any further. I can keep my ego out of it. I don't need to be right in the situation, right? So I feel like Krishna does a lot of that,
right?
He's able to calm a lot of storms. And sometimes he's like very smug about it.
Right.
Other times he's very angry about it. But like he's a very fluid character in that he is impious at times, and sometimes he's like the knight in shining armor.
Right. I totally agree with that assessment. I think you're spot on that. And, like another example that comes to mind that makes me think about that is like, right before the war was supposed to start, he came to Hastinapur, the area that they were living, the Kauravas were living, and was like, hey, I'm coming for a peace offering. Like, and he came so many times. He was like, I'm coming here. I don't want this to happen. And like put like all ego aside. He was disrespected many times, but was like, you know what? For the sake of the greater good, I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to give you a shot. I'm going to give you your last shot to be the best version of yourself. And if not, then here we go, kind of thing. And so like, I think it's just interesting, like the fluidity that you talk about, that yes, there's a different way to do things, but then and in that fluidity, you have to have that right mixture of like holding your ground. This is my last straw and we can't do this anymore. But also like, I'm going to do right. I'm going to do right in the best way that I possibly know how.
Okay, completely agree. And like, we're all fluid as human beings, right? Like you think that like, we're also quick to like throw ourselves into like a lifestyle. Like, okay, so I lift weights. All I'm going to do is lift weights, right? And you go into that. Or I do cardio, kickbox. That's all I'm going to do, And I think what's interesting about that is like you turn yourself off to so many things. So like with fitness specifically, right? Like I think we both like to be individuals that can do anything at any time.
Right.
Like right now we could go run 5 miles. We could, lift some weights. We could do a cardio kickbox video, right? So that's balance, right? You peel that back a step further, even with the books I'm reading, right? Like if I didn't open myself up to read this book, like I've been reading a lot of self-help books, right? Power of Now, things like that, 4 Agreements. But if I didn't open myself up to a new book, then like we wouldn't connect.
Right,
do you know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And even in the workplace, if I was just so concerned on staying where I was for the rest of my life, then I wouldn't learn new skills, and then I wouldn't be fluid, I wouldn't be dynamic. And but what happens through that, I feel, is like your overall moral schema, your morality just like constantly elevates. It constantly elevates. Sometimes it goes, sometimes it's constantly going in different directions, And I think that, everyone wants to seek comfortability. It's not a bad thing, but like there can be times where like, I'm not like when I go see my brother and sister-in-law, I'm a type of individual, right? And then when I hang out with my friends, I'm a different type of individual. But like my basic morality is there, right? When I'm with my wife, I'm different too. When I'm at work, I'm different too. But there's a brand of me that goes to every one of these.
Yeah, there's some consistency there for sure.
Right, you just turn the volume up and down here and there on certain things. So I think I learned a lot of that from Krishna in this book specifically, right? Never before did I have like this type of like, oh, he's like a bro.
Yeah, right.
Type of thing with him,
Yeah, like he's not like this weird like someone we put on a pedestal that we can't relate to. And it's interesting, like bringing back to like what you were talking about, like talking about sex and these taboo things that we can't, like our culture doesn't allow us to talk about in a constructive way. Sometimes I reflect on these types of scenarios, like one, like how there's a little bit of gray in this book, but also like how we grew up, and that I wonder if like the reason, like there's these some people take ideals and like behaviors from books like this, and then they like take it and they just like say this is the only thing. They like silo it. Right. And so like for example, like they'll take like there's mention in the Mahabharata here about like how why Draupadi's amazing is because she's so chaste, you know, like just chastity there. And then Sita too, like in Ramayana, like she's pure and like the earth tested her purity. And it's like, what are these concepts that we're like, and then maybe that has carried forward in time where like now because this is the only thing that our generation before us know, they don't know much about how to communicate, and so therefore they say it's bad. They label it and they say, oh well, this is how the ideals are, and so therefore we can't talk about sex and dating and, you know, the opposite gender or this whatever gender, and you can't talk about that in a constructive way because they don't have the tools to talk about it because that's what's been siloed over all this time. And I just think that like you read these books and you realize that it wasn't black and white like that. It actually wasn't. You're just thinking it was like that. Yeah. You know, people, you know, had relationships like with other women, and people were not perfect in every single way, and people did things that maybe were off color and did things for good as long as their morality was good. And it's like the interpretation that has been sucked out from here and been transported through generations of time is what I have a problem with. Yeah. But then you go back to something like this and you're like, this is not how it was. Like even like the caste system, for example, like people take so much like weird ego in this and like hierarchy, and it's like, yo, that's not what it was. What it actually was just a division of labor that was fluid. If you were born Brahmin, doesn't mean you have to be Brahmin. You can become a Kshatriya and go in the army and be a warrior. You could become whatever. It was fluid. You could do whatever you wanted. It was literally just because a society was building its infrastructure and needed a way to get all the tasks accomplished. That's all it was. 100%. But then now people like take that to mean like, oh, I can only do this, this, and this, and this. And it's like interpretation is sometimes the problem and what creates the problems with communication. Right.
Like I come from the scholars and you came from the working class. Right. And it's like woman, bitch, like whoever. Yeah. I was like, that was a million years ago. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not a divide now.
No, know? Yeah.
No, and it's so interesting. Like even something minute, right? I'm sure this is like something we can all relate to. Like, you know, if in a lot of households we say like Jay Yogeshwar, right? But in some houses they say Jay Swaminarayan, right? That can be a big issue.
It can be,
right? It's like, are we ever going to get past like a semantic and like be like, hey, we're cut from the same cloth, you know? Like we're even if you're not Indian, you know, we're all human beings, right? We're all cut from the same cloth. So how many barriers am I going to put up between you and I that are going to separate us from actually connecting as individuals?
Right. And if the purpose of what you're saying is just to praise God that you believe in, then I don't know that your God would be, and this is me being off color, but just being like, would get mad that you acknowledged another one. Like if you're trying to create barriers based on words and semantics, then are you really honoring the spirit of what you're saying to begin with? I think no. Yeah. But like it happens. Like because people find comfort and security in routine and ritual. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are people, there's, you know, I participate in rituals and I do my own thing, but my goal always is to understand the meaning behind it and be fluid about it, you know? And so like for that reason, like people find comfort and security in that type of routine. And it's interesting because like we were talking about how like babies, they find comfort in a routine, and routine's important, and adults do too. Yeah. They like routine, they like comfort, but it becomes a problem when we use that to divide ourselves.
Yes,
you know?
Yes. And no, I you know, going on the ritualistic tangent for a second, you know, I know we grew up with a lot of rituals, and you know, rituals are great. I think they're good, like showcases of your faith and things like that. But that's what they are. Yeah. You know, they're showcases of your faith, and if you don't go beyond them, then I think you do the religion and your God a disservice. You know, like you know, I think, you know, a lot of times growing up with, you know, Indian aunties that we were around, it's like we dealt with a lot of like, you know, corrupt individuals, right? And I still think that to this day. And but what washes all away is if you do a havan one day and you're purified again. Right. And I don't think that, you know, their God would be pleased with that, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
Saying, hey, look, you're living this like gossip-oriented, indulgent life, but you think once a week, because you come here, you're going to wash away all of that. And I think that's really bogus because it takes any of the credibility off the individual and puts it all on this like third party, you know? And I think on the other side of that, those rituals become twice, 3 times, 4 times as powerful when you live by the principles that, you know, that is outlined for you, right? Yeah. Like if, you know, for example, now, like I think the closest thing to spirituality I have is like music or like friendships and relationships. And, you know, I learned from that because like I bring my best self to those interactions. You know, I'm like, okay, like if I want to continuously showcase that I'm bettering myself to you as like, you know, like a best friend, then like that's spiritual for me, right? Because you're making me a better person, you know, and that's the way I deal with spirituality, you know. But if you were a friend of mine that we related on just like talking shit all the time and we got together and just gossip, that's to me equivalent of like not living like a pious life that you should abide by, and just doing like a ritualistic thing. Just let's have a brunch one day and just talk shit, and we connected, we're friends.
Right,
like,
right.
That's bogus, you know. Like it should be something that promotes you, that betters you, that constantly challenges you, that constantly promotes you learning about yourself too, you know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And like, you know, there are some things like, you know, for example, like during Diwali, there's like the first day, like we do that thing where we it's kind of celebration of wealth, but intangible wealth, really. Like, you know, me and my wife always do this, like, you know, these rituals, but in a way what we do is we try to get something out of them every time, where after we do them, we always reflect on all the wealth that we have in our life. We have a conversation and we say like, we are grateful for our siblings, for our parents, for what we've achieved this year, and that we're like grateful and what we're going to move forward with. And it's a really nice transition, because soon after comes like, you know, the holidays and New Year's, and so like our mind is like stimulated to start thinking about like what we want to achieve for ourselves and what we're grateful for. And I feel like that's, for me, that's where I only do the things that are meaningful and are going to stimulate my mind for betterment, you know. And that's why, and in a way also, like, it's a way for me to have those conversations with the generation above me. So like we always make it this habit where like we will always call like our parents, and we'll call my wife's parents, and we'll always like just talk about like what we're grateful for.
Nice.
And it's like that dialogue, and we have this thing, we go home, we eat dinner, and then we talk about like, wow, like what were we grateful for this year? And it's a way to like start dialogue that maybe wouldn't have happened naturally or organically, you know. And it is, I think it's directly related to the fact that we were both doing the ritual and we're both whatever. But I think that but then it's easy to transition into, well, you did it this way and you did it this way. Oh, you did it from outside in and inside out. And it's like, if you get stuck in those details, then you're missing it.
Yeah.
You know, and no one cares about that. But if you're just talking about the concept, then hey, if you got a good conversation out of it, then great. You know, if that helped you, that great, you know?
No, I completely agree. And it's you realize, like, we're sitting down just talking right now, but we're talking like we don't normally talk.
Right.
We're sitting down talking about a topic, we're face to face and things like that. And you realize you have to be intentional when you want to connect with an individual or like a set of people, because otherwise it's gonna, like, people are too cool for it. You know, too cool to talk about goals and like what you're grateful for and show gratitude. And like these are foundational principles of like any religion or any like good relationship, is to show gratitude. And I think we get caught up in having to be like these providers, and like you know, I have to be someone who doesn't experience any problems, otherwise people think I'm imperfect. But no, like, you know, showing gratitude is not going to be perfect. You know, being honest is going to be tough. There's going to be times where like my honesty is not going to be maybe even appropriate, but I have to do it because it's like right, you know, and things like that. And there's sometimes where it's not right. So it, you know, especially for the older generation, they are not good at saying thank you, at talking about what they're grateful for. And I think that's really good. I didn't know that you do that you have those conversations with them. That's really good. Are they pretty receptive about it?
Yeah, very. And it's like become a tradition as well too, which is nice. And it is. It's because like, it's also nice because you also, like, I also reflect on this where I'm like, you know, like our generation above us, like they grew up totally different than we do, you know, like the way that they frame normal conversations and come into interactions is based on how they grew up and what they saw, you know, like what their life was like. And I forget that sometimes. I'm like, you know, sometimes relating to them based on what they grew up with, like helps like them feel this sense of like, oh, I feel comfortable in this conversation, or I feel comfortable like showing my intimacy because you're coming with me with tools that I grew up with, you know? And so that's kind of nice, like especially like with our families, where, you know, that's the way that their tone of conversation comes from. Like, this is the dynamics that they grew up from. So like, you know, them watching us do these things give them a sense of pride, but then also allows them to be vulnerable. And so like I appreciate that, because I'm like, yeah, and it brings them memories of like when they grew up and what they did. And in a way, rituals can also be just a way to bring the family together at the core. That's it. Like, it doesn't have to be anything major. It can be, hey, this is the one day of the year that all of us stop our busy schedules and just do this together. And we all have a role. And that's why, like, I really love like Hindu weddings, for example, in a way. And like those have changed over time a lot too. But what I like about like how Hindu weddings are structured is that they have tactfully thought of every single person to have an involvement. You know, like when the bride comes down, it's with her mom's brothers. You know, when the the girl circles around her brothers are the ones that get to do a certain part and fill like her next step. There's some things that only the boys' parents can do the day before or go in the barat. And so it's just really interesting because every single person has a different role.
Yeah.
There's this part like that's called Akhanda Saubhagya. We come back to that circle, but like then it's like members from both sides wishing good wishes to the bride and groom, and so both sides get to bring more people into the mix. And so I really just like those. I think ritual sometimes, when done correctly with the spirit, can just bring people together, and I think that's important too.
No, I completely agree, and I never think about those things with Hindu ceremonies. Like because there's a lot of like drama put around them,
so much
that you lose that. You lose that, and even for like our wedding, my wedding, it's like. I think a lot of the themes were there.
Yes,
right?
definitely.
There. And it's like the togetherness is like something that's great. There's different roles. Like the groomsman plays a certain role for me, and but it's special. Like you officiated. So that's a special role there.
Yeah.
The sister-in-law, right? She was very close to the bride the whole time. Kind of played that whole like a. It's like a bride's bitch, right?
Right.
Someone who is like there as a catch-all, who is very unconditional, and that's another thing too, right? So I hate that like rituals, like this is what happened to us with religion, right?
Right, totally.
It's like we grew up kind of with the negativity around it, and it goes with a lot, right? Like I like learning. I like exercising. I like reading. I like traveling. I like being a good person, right?
Yeah.
But when it's like shoved down your throat with like expectations, it's never going to be a good thing, because it's not what is us, Right. It's not innate for like a human being to like have all these parameters around them, like they need to experience and things like that. And the funny thing is there's a lot of things that we grew up learning that I rejected, I'm going back to now. Like, these, like this book is all
right.
Hinduism, right? Like it's things that I rejected. And I think like those themes of togetherness and humility and responsibility, respectfulness, those are all things that you learn, like I said, cross-culturally, man.
Right.
And I think those were the things I wish we were taught, like as we grew up in this organization, where it's like, you gotta, like life is tough, right? There's no right answer. There's gray area, but you can put some of these rituals in place, and the theme of them is togetherness, and like you're gonna receive some euphoria and like some beneficial factors from that. But maybe even the people who are teaching it to us didn't have that oversight, or didn't have that deep dive.
Right, and absolutely, and I think that's why, like, I think what you say makes a lot of sense, because, like, for example, like your wedding, I always use that as an example with like a lot of my friends, where I'm like, I feel like your guys' wedding was such a demonstration of what like the pure themes of what marriage should look like. Like you guys chose the right things. You didn't like skimp out on any of the details, but the theme of the whole thing was, who am I? Who are you? And who are we together? For me, like that's what and everyone took something else away. That's the other thing. Everyone else took something else away, but it was a pure representation of, hey, this is what we're promising to each other, and this is what our married life is going to look like. And there was no person in that room that left without thinking like, whoa, like these people are truly in love. Like, every single person, I guarantee you, left that thinking that. And you're like, but that's what marriage is. That's what weddings are. And if we get lost in the details of, you have to do 4 feras, or you have to do 7 saptapadi, like everything has a meaning. And so like for me personally, saptapadi meant something. For me personally, every fera meant something.
Yeah.
But for like different people, like for me, in my eyes, like you captured like what my wedding meant to me, you captured in your way, and it resonated with me because like you kept the themes of what marriage should be. It wasn't frivolous. It wasn't like, I don't know if I'm making sense,
yeah.
But it basically like was a pure way of capturing all the themes of goodness and pure, like, like just like genuineness through there. And I don't think you need a Hindu wedding to do that. I don't, and,
right.
And we didn't truly. And so I think like it just goes to show like rituals can be good, but at the same time we should always be thinking about the themes and the underlying, and manifest them how you want to manifest them. Because again, going back to what Krishna was in this, fluid. It's fluid. It doesn't have to be this way. It can be what you want it to be.
Yeah, and 100%. And the funny thing about like the religious aspect of it is like in Christianity, nowhere in the Bible does it say you have to set up a church.
Right.
It doesn't say that anywhere.
No.
And nowhere in Hinduism does it say you have to set up an organization around it, And what I think that means is that make it your own. right? There should be people maybe like priests and maharajas that they're experts and they can like give you a little bit that knowledge that is not right there in front of you. I agree with that, but there shouldn't be agendas around it, right? There shouldn't be propaganda around it, because it's really not something that you can even put your finger on. Like I can't like what Hinduism means to me is not what it means to you, right? They're totally different things, but we have a mutual understanding of certain things that we can talk about and factual things that we can talk about. But like, I'm taking a lot from Hinduism, from Buddhism, from Christianity, and all these different things, and I'm seeing a lot of commonalities. And the one thing that I'm seeing is like the human component is great in ways that it's intangible. It's not apples to apples, but humans have this ability to put like this uncanny need to like streamline, and make like an organization out of it. And I try to combat that actively, in my day to day. Is like, hey, look, am I doing things just to experience them? Because I think it's going to be good for me, or am I trying to make this like a business?
Right.
Am I trying to make this like a wealth thing? And I feel like I would turn myself off from a lot of conversations if I thought that like I was going to make money off of this conversation, because I'm not. I'm really not going to make anything off of it. So I think that religion teaches you just to like experience life to its fullest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it gives you a set of tools to maximize, and that's at baseline what I think this book tells you to do, and what the Bible tells you to do. What the Tao, that whole trajectory tells you to do. They're all similar in that way, right?
Yeah.
You just have a tool set for life.
I totally agree. And like, in like kind of what you're saying is like, there's this individual manifestation of religion, and whatever that means, whatever spectrum that's in too, little bit, lot bit, building everything together. But I think what happens with organized religion a lot of times is that then when you try to take religion and make it organized, then you try to do something that politically brings everyone together in a streamlined way that inevitably means that you lose the individual and the organization matters more.
Yep.
And that's the problem. I think that religion is meant for the individual. It's for how you manifest it. Everybody's different. That's the beauty of humanity. We're all different, and what we gravitate towards is so different.
Yes.
And so like if the way that I'm supposed to live my life is like in a book, and I can only do that, then I lose myself in that.
Yes.
And then we start to become hierarchical, and then we start to create rules, and then we start to find who follows those rules and who doesn't, and then we find the good people and the bad people, and now we've divided ourselves in something altogether.
That's a good analysis, man. That's a very good analysis. So as we wrap up, man, what is maybe one of your main takeaways from this book that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think the one takeaway that I was thinking that you were going to ask me a question like this. I've been thinking about that for the last month or so. But I think the thing that I take away the most is, a lot of times when it comes to the stories in Hinduism or, principles of Hinduism, a lot of times there's this sense of, did this really happen or did it not really happen, that allows people to question the validity of these texts. Like, it does, like, did Kunti really pray and a sun came, or
right.
Did Krishna really just wave his hands and the clouds came? Like, that seems implausible. And for me, I think what I take away from a book like this and in general is that honestly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it happened or not, and I think with the Ramayana and like when they wrote Ram on the rocks, and that's how they created the bridge to Lanka. Like, some people believe that happened, and maybe it did. Yeah. But for me, it doesn't matter. I think what matters more is the dynamics that you learn from where we came from, the character analysis that you do that you can apply in your life, and that every person has some gray to them, and that perhaps we can learn something from every single person in what they do well and maybe what they're working on, because we also have things that we're working on and can be better as well too. So I think that everyone has something they bring to the table, and that like life's goal should be to find that goodness that you can kind of incorporate into your life. So that's kind of what I took away.
No, that's extremely profound, and I would align with that 100%. I think it seems like the book's done a lot for you, in terms of just like broadening your horizon and your scope on the religion and stuff like that. And that's what I like to hear, because it's good to challenge yourself, and it's good to know that you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
I think that's like a crucial component of life, is that I just don't know anything, man. I'm just trying to learn things, and things of that sort. One thing that I would probably take away from this is that, like, absorb knowledge, absorb as much as you can, because what's going to happen is at first you're going to have like an initial like I took in a lot of knowledge from this book, right? But it was very surface level. You know, I just took in facts and maybe some high level themes. But as we prepped for this podcast, I went back through it and I did a character analysis, and I said, okay, look, like Arjun's the balance, you know, and things of that sort, and that you learn from doing a deep dive on life, right? Like you have a lot of surface level interactions on the day to day, but for the ones that you think are worth, you know, diving into, you should lean into things, right? Like if you like fitness, lean into it. If you like, you know, being a doctor, lean into it. Don't do it half-assed, because you're gonna do that thing a disservice, and you're gonna do yourself a disservice. So that's one major learning I took away from this, because I think the main reason Arjun had his melancholy was because he did not lean into it, right? He he looked high level and said, I have my brothers and my family on this side of Kurukshetra, and I'm over here, and what do I do now? And Krishna was like, lean in, man. Understand that, you know, it's not about like love in this moment. It's about doing what's right. Like if you were truly enlightened, you would have no qualm being on this battlefield right now. And I think that that's what I'm looking for, right? Is like, if I had pure of heart, then like I don't feel bad for things, you know what I'm saying? If I was acting with tact and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good takeaway as well too. You know, I think it's something that's probably like good for us to all hear and think about all the time, because I feel like we're often limited by, you know, like what we expect from ourselves and what the society expects from us, and like worried about failure and all this kind of thing. So that prevents us from leaning into things and just like putting our whole selves in. But if we like just go for it and do it, I bet that even if we fail, we'll get so much out of it because we put our whole selves into it. Because like when you put your whole self in and you do it, you know you tried, and sometimes that's the most important thing.
That's all you need, man. Well, hey, I appreciate you doing this with me, man. This was really fun. I think we should do another one.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. And also like this was really good for like appreciating like how hard work this is, because like you got to really listen, and you really got to like you like naturally like keep conversation going really nicely. But yeah, no, it was really fun, and yeah, I'd love to do another one.
I appreciate it, man. We'll definitely do another one sometime soon. But I appreciate all the kind words, man. It's conversations like these that keep me doing these type of things and keep me on my A game. So really appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Only positivity.
Yes, sir. Love you, bro.